There we are. Okay, so we're on lesson 2 this week. We're looking at architecture and crowds and things like that. So last week we were looking at perspective, and we looked at the theme of 2-point perspective as well. So I showed you some basics about drawing and about the position of the viewer to whatever it is you're looking at as well. So you're going to get different points of view on whatever you're looking at. So in this case, it would be architecture. We also looked at photographs last week. So I actually chose a few photographs for you to work from. And I also showed you a way to get the perspective by cutting out the photograph so that then you could get the lines and things of perspective and then start drawing those in. And adding some detail and tone and shadow and so forth using a pen. So we're going to do something quite similar really today. We're going to look at single point perspective using similar techniques, and also the drawings that you're going to work from are obviously artist's work rather than just a photograph today. So you'll have the opportunity to really look closely at how other artists tackle the subject and draw them, so that then you can perhaps look at more expressive ways or the different approaches that artists have to this kind of work, architecture. So we'll go over to the wall in the studio and have a look at what I've got on there this evening, and I'll talk us through it. Okay, so at the top here, we've got the picture that we were looking at last week. And if you remember, depending on where you're standing or how you're standing in these diagrams anyway, can affect your line of sight, but also how you look at something. So at the top there, if you remember, you can see a chap standing or somebody standing on some boxes, and their line of sight is above the box or the object here, and then the person is standing, sitting in a manhole and down a manhole cover looking underneath. So we get the different points of perspective on here. So this is very similar with the single point perspective, which we're going to look at this evening. Just to remind you though, last week we were looking at these buildings over here. Let me just see if I can grab hold of one. So we've got the pub and we've got the 2-point perspective picture just here as well. So this is the drawing that I prepared for you to work on, which was based on the photograph you can see on this sheet as well. And one of the points that people brought up was, oh, you know, where is the, we can't see the vanishing points on this as we could the diagrams. So the idea here was that you could cut out the building and then measure off all the points of perspective, which is what we were doing with the following drawing after that. So the idea of this one was for you to have a go at shading, adding detail, learning to understand the points of perspective. And the pub at the top here, what was it called again? The what it's called now, it was the labor and weight. With this one, it's a little bit more of a challenge, got a curved bit at the front there, but the idea again was to cut the building out and literally from the photograph or print out and mark off the lines of perspective. So we're doing something similar to that this evening, looking at architecture, but rather than having 2 points of perspective, we're just going to have one, which I'm going to show you how that works in a few minutes. So with single point perspective, it is as it sounds, which is literally one vanishing point and everything going towards that vanishing point. So we can see the horizon line going through the center and where all the lines lead to in the center of the page. The front of all of these boxes are horizontal and vertical lines, but then the perspective parts are all diagonal lines leading in to the center vanishing point, that little dot in the center. And then we've got the vertical lines at the back when we've decided, okay, this box goes far enough, it's a big enough box, that's where I want it to end. All right, so it's basically the same as before, but with only one vanishing point this time. So we're going to have a look at some different artists, and one artist that I've got for you to look at this evening is somebody called Luke Adam Hawker, who is an artist that goes out on the street and does his drawings. He uses the lines of perspective very clearly in his drawings, but very lightly using a pen before then working into the details. But you'll see something really interesting about the way he does his lines. They're kind of a bit wiggly and things. It's a very, very short clip that I found on YouTube this evening. So we're going to have a quick look at that. So I'm just going to put it on my screen over here and go over to the video player. So you can see on here, this is a close-up just behind, and it's in perspective as well. I think the actual photo is in perspective. But can you see all the wavy and wiggly kind of loose lines that the artist does? Really interesting, but at the same time, beautifully accurate, and lots of tone and shadow in there, and lots of multiple lines layered over the top of each other. So we'll have a quick look at this video. If I can play it. Yes. There's the lines of perspective. And then gradually adding in loads of amazing detail as well. So a really different approach, but one which works over a structure of lines, first of all, which is exactly what we're doing. There we go. Okay, so I'll come back over to the desktop now, and we'll have a chat about what we're doing this evening. Okay, so I'll talk a bit more about that in a few minutes. So here was the drawing that I sent to you to be able to print off and work into. So if you remember, it had all the construction lines and the lines that go to the vanishing point for you then to draw into. And you may have noticed last week that I started to do, I was doing the standard sort of cross-hatching and all that sort of thing, which you can see on here. So on the main parts of the building, look, we've got lots of cross-hatching. And remember that a lot of the time, it's not just a case of you've shaded it, it's done. You're also going back to the drawing or back to the area that you're working on. So I would have gone back to this, say, window just here quite a few times. And also these cross-hatched areas, I went over those quite a few times to build up the tone. On some areas, we've got like dashes, dots, and scribbles. Up here, we've also got little dots to suggest the brickwork. And then these lines, these hatched lines, look, actually follow the lines of perspective that I put in previously. So when we were looking at Luke Adam Hawker's work, you could see that he'd done all of these lines and actually made them almost like a decorative part of his work. But then later, I started to play around with doing something really kind of different in the sky. So to get this sense of the air and to contrast the marks that we've got on the building here. All right. So we're going to have a go perhaps at trying out some different ideas and techniques like that today. I'll try and put on an Adam Luke Hawker picture onto the screen. But if you're on your device and you want to try and find a picture of your own, you can do. But anyway, let's have a look at what else we've got here. So you'll remember me doing, well, I didn't do this one in the last lesson. I did this one in the daytime. This one was one with all the construction lines, but then I did a really fast drawing. So it's almost like you're putting your pen down on the paper and you just keep going. The idea is to loosen up and see what you can come out with as far as the drawing goes there. All right, so some of the artists that I put online for you in the drive look like this. So we've got kind of ornate pictures like this, and we've also got sort of alleyways and things a little bit like this as well. So in order to find the lines that you need to draw, you do exactly or pretty much very similar stuff to what we did last week, only this time you won't need to cut out anything. So you should just be able to get your picture. If it's a bit smaller than these ones, because this is fully A4 size, and if yours is only A4 size or A5 size, which is smaller, then don't worry about it. You can do a smaller drawing if you want to as well. So on here, you can see that I've started, I put these blue lines on here. I'll zoom in a little bit so you can see a bit closer what I mean. So in order to work out where the perspective is, you can see it, can't you? You can see where things are kind of like, there's these people in the background here. These pillars are big and they get smaller as they go into the distance. We can't see the other side of the building like the drawings we did last week. Just one side of the building, which leads all the way to the vanishing point in the middle, just here. So this is what you do. You don't need a blue pen or anything like that. You can just do it in a normal pen, or if you've got a colour pencil, you could do that if you want to. So what I did essentially is this. I got hold of my ruler and I just followed the lines that are already on the building and drew a line through and then found another one. So this is the top of the pillars just here, and drew another line, and you'll see pretty quickly on most of these drawings that the lines will converge to a point just there. Okay, so when they do that, you can also, at that point, you can do one horizontal line straight across, and that is the viewer's point, where the viewer's standing, the view line. So very much like the drawings we were just looking at with the man in the manhole, the man standing on the bench and so forth. This is where the viewer's eye line is within this particular picture. And then look, we can add more lines at the top like that. Okay, so you can do this with pretty much any picture. As it's an artwork, though, sometimes you may find that the lines don't quite match. So take that with a little pinch of salt, because sometimes people are out sketching and it doesn't really affect the overall effect of the picture a lot of the time, but sometimes the lines might be slightly off or slightly out. So try and take that with a pinch of salt. I did have somebody this morning making corrections. They're saying, oh, this artist has got this wrong, I'm going to draw it right. So you may be able to do that as well. All right, so that was one example. This is probably the most ornate one, and in fact the file name I gave for that was called Ornate. The one that I worked on, which is an ideal one if you've not done much of this before, is this picture here, or one exactly like it if there's another one on there. So here what I did is I took my ruler again, I used my blue marker or my blue highlighter, but you can use a colour pen like I said, or a pencil. I drew the line at the bottom of the steps all the way through, and then I found the line of perspective at the bottom of the steps and drew that through, and then that gave me a crossover point, so I'm calling that my vanishing point. And then I went horizon line or viewer's point of view, and then I looked at all the other angles that you can see on the building. So there's one here, look, which goes to this kind of ledge on the building, the top of the building up here, and so on. So we can get some pretty good ideas about where the details are going to be. So you end up with this kind of star shape on the picture. All right, so from there, I'll just turn this sheet over so I can just remind you or show you. From there, you can then, on your paper, draw those points, do some dots for the corners so you can see the difference, dots and dashes for the points we're drawing in. There's another one, and there's the other one. Pull that away, and so you may be seeing, you may be understanding now we're doing something very similar, but without obviously cutting out this building. It's quite hard to cut out a building that covers the whole picture anyway, so we're all right. Okay, put my, this is my horizon line, and then I can start to work out where the vanishing point is by putting my pencil over it, just about there. Then start to join these lines up to the vanishing point like this. Now, the interesting thing about this is, if you remember, we've done grid drawings before, where we use a grid of squares to work out where the details are. This has divided your piece of paper up into sections. So essentially, you could fold your paper in half, look, and we've got a triangle here, which we've also got just here. So I can then start to draw the details in perspective into this section just here. I'll just fold that over there like that. So if you wanted to do that, a few people were doing that, but I just thought that actually this tells us exactly what goes into that space. All right, so single point perspective, one vanishing point, and almost like a shard or a broken piece of glass helps us to divide the space, but also, importantly, understand the perspective. So the task today is to take an artwork and start to experiment with this artist that we've been looking at. So here's an example of his work. I'll try and put that on screen as we're working. And here's what I did with it, inspired by the artist that I just showed you, Luke Adam Hawker. So I built up all the tone of shadow with lots of scribbles, hatched lines, you can see them in there, and these lines look, all these lines that go up and down the picture, a little bit like his work in that they're kind of wobbly and things. All right, but saying that, you know, if you see an artwork that I've put on there that is drawn in pencil, then by all means have a go at shading like that artist instead. Okay, but that's something I saw and I thought was really inspiring that might be nice for us to have a look at this evening. I'm going to be doing this one over here, this tram picture. So if you remember the manhole diagram that we were looking at before, this photograph or this drawing has been taken from a very low point of view, almost underneath the tram itself. So here's my, I'll show you my points of perspective on this one that I drew. So that's upside down. There we go. So yeah, look, so the lines of perspective even work in the reflections of the water, and they come along the building here, look, to this point. So I just draw my line with my ruler like I did a minute ago. You can see all those lines, even from up here, come down to this point, and then the horizon line, or the viewer's eye line, is across here, like that. All right, so then I started to very lightly with a pencil sketch out all the shapes, and this really helps because if it's got quite a lot in it and you sketch it out really lightly, obviously you can make alterations and things as you go along, and it allows you to remove bits. But I've got all the shapes here now for this drawing that I'm going to do, and I may decide to do that one in pencil, but I'm still really inspired by the pen. All right, okay, so now we'll get started then, but if you've got any questions, all you've got to do is ask. Okay, so we get started straight away using pencil to begin with, and I do actually go back and start using the pen, as I mentioned just a minute ago. I am really inspired by the use of pen. So one of the things I did notice whilst working on this, that I think possibly that this drawing was made as a layer on some software on a computer. So the layer was placed over the top of the photo, and then drawing was done over the top using some editing software or some drawing software. The reason I say that is because I looked at some of the marks whilst I was drawing and noticed how clean they are, but also how perhaps the chap, there's a fellow just standing next to the tram who very much looks like a photographic image, but I don't suppose we'll ever really know, but that was my interpretation of it anyway. So I just thought at the beginning here, I thought, oh, maybe I'll do a pencil drawing, because I kind of felt like doing that at the beginning. But then as we progress, I suddenly decide that actually no, I would like to do the pen, so that I can build up that sort of tangling web of lines that the artist we looked at earlier used. So you'll see me in a short while switch over and start using some pen. To begin with though, and this is something you can do as well if you choose to, is you can use a pencil just to sort of loosen you up, and maybe pencil doesn't feel quite as threatening as using a pen straight on the page as well. For me, I would probably just use pen straight off normally, because I'd be quite confident with the pencil sketch that I'd already got underneath. The artist we were looking at, he did actually, I think, just dive in with a pen straight away without any pencil marks. That comes with obviously years of confidence building through experience and things like that too, but everybody works in different ways, so there's nothing wrong, of course, with doing that, working like this with a pencil underneath. And it's actually quite a lot of fun when it comes down to it, to have all the pencil lines already in there, so you can just go a bit mad and loosen up, as I mentioned, with the pen a bit later on. You'll see me actually make adjustments to the reflection that I put in of the tram a little bit later. I realised perhaps it was a bit longer. It does mean the windows are a bit longer, but it doesn't matter. It still has the effect that we were after at the end. So we've got most of the drawing drawn in with a bit more detail than it was previously. So I sketched out the main outlines earlier in the day, so I was kind of ready to go with a bit more detail afterwards. So after a little bit of thought, I decided to go on with the pen, and there it is. So these are rollable pens, which aren't quite as sensitive as a biro pen, though I was using last week. So a biro, you can do very fine lines. You can use very small, like you can use very small pens that are very, very fine, but I just decided to go for it with this single rollable pen that I had. Can't remember what the nib was just now, but try them out. These are just standard pens that you can buy from the shop, basically. So you can see how I've started to add a little bit more tone and shadow into the image. I'm building up much more detail on top of the detail that I've just added. The nice thing about these pens is you can keep, like we did with the biro, just keep working over the top, keep building the layers of shadow and detail on top of your picture, and you'll find you get some nice depth. But if you're experimenting with the marks, you can get some really interesting effects. And like with most practices doing art, the more you do it, the more experience you're going to get, the more confidence you have, and the more likely you are to put even more new ideas onto the top. You may have just noticed there that I've been using the pen to line things up as well. So the pen can be used for just checking your angles. It can also be used for measuring and comparing. So I'm comparing the size of, on the original drawing, the size of the tram below with the size of the tram above, and then kind of trying to match that up to my own drawing just here. The windows are slightly longer on the reflection, but as I mentioned, I don't think it matters too much really. We still get that impression of a reflection. So the pencil drawing, I go back over the pencil drawing a little bit as we progress on with the drawing, and you'll see all the other details start to be built in. So, and in some respects I'm limited by the drawing here, so the details that the artist put in, I'm putting in here, but the opportunity is that I can also add in some of my own ideas as we progress on with the drawing. So you'll see me putting in maybe extra lines, extra shadows, extra ideas inspired by the artist we looked at on the video a short while ago as well. So here we go, up and down with the lines, scribbling, layering, and working quite loosely at the same time. So I'm also working very quickly. If you're actually out on location, you can be standing there for quite a long time as well. When I've done drawings outside, you can be standing there for a long time sketching away. So as you saw, sometimes artists will take the easel just so they've got something to lean on whilst they're there. So the drawings come together a little bit more now. Still a little bit more detail to put in. In the time that I've got, I just tried to get as much done as I possibly could for this demonstration. But the perspective itself has worked very nicely. Using those blue lines that you can see on the drawing to work out the perspective has enabled me to achieve similar results. And you can do this with a photograph. In fact, one of the students this evening did do exactly the same technique, using lines to create the perspective of the picture. So have a go and see how you get on. Thank you very much.